The first knock didn't sound like a knock at all, more like the brittle snap of a twig, somewhere far off in the frozen stillness. Hawk paused mid-step, his instincts flaring like a lantern touched to dry grass. The second knock came sharper, deliberate, with the weight of someone who had chosen to announce themselves. For 20 years, no one had dared set foot past the split cedar fence that marked the edge of his land. For 20 years, Hawk had been fine with that dot the land around. His home was a fortress of stone and wind. Sheer canyon walls, streaked red with iron, rose like the ribs of the earth around him. Winter came early here and stayed longer than was welcome. The wind carried old sounds in its howling war cries from battles no one remembered, the restless whisper of men who died without graves. Inside, the fire crackled low in the hearth. His rifle leaned against the far wall, but his hand went instead to the tomahawk at his belt. It wasn't habit, it was instinct. Out here, when someone came knocking, they were either desperate or dangerous. Sometimes both. Hawk's bear. Feet crossed the creaking floorboards as he approached the heavy oak door. His breath fogged in the cold air that seeped in through the cracks. The handle was iron, worn smooth over the years. He gripped it, then paused to listen. Outside, the wind hissed through the pine boughs. Beneath it, faint footsteps crunching the frost. More than one set. When he swung the door open, the cold came first biting, sharp, filling the cabin with the scent of snow and smoke. Then came the sight. A young woman stood in the dim light, her shoulders squared against the wind, though her coat was little more than a threadbare wrap. Her lips were cracked, her cheeks burned raw by the elements. In her arms, a bundle of ragged quilt twitched, a small fist pressing out from within, searching for heat. The child was tiny, newborn small, and Hawk could hear the faint, uneven breathing even over the wind. Her eyes met his. Not pleading, but hard in the way of someone who had been forced past the point of fear. "My child is freezing," she said simply, her voice raw. "We need a roof for the night." Hawk didn't answer immediately. His gaze dropped to the snow behind her. The wind had already begun filling in the tracks. But not before he saw what mattered: two sets of prints, hers and a much smaller set. And then, farther out, blurred by drifting snow, a third trail. He couldn't tell if it was man or beast, but it was too close for comfort. "Where's the rest of your party?" Hawk's voice was low, steady. "There is no rest," she replied. Her jaw tightened, and her arm shifted slightly, drawing the bundle closer. Hawk studied her. The Old West was full of half-truths and full dangers. He'd learned long ago that strangers never arrived alone, even if their companions were shadows. He stepped back from the door, not a welcome, just enough to let her pass if she dared. The woman hesitated only a heartbeat before stepping inside. The warmth of the fire reached for her, though her boots tracked in the cold. Hawk shut the door behind her, the latch falling into place with a solid, final click. He didn't ask her name, and she didn't offer it. Instead, he moved to the hearth and tossed on another log. The flames licked up the wood, throwing light across the cabin's sparse interior tools on the wall. A bedroll in the corner, the pelts of wolf and deer stretched for curing. The child stirred, letting out a weak cry. Hawk's eyes flicked to it, then back to her face. "Feed the fire," he said, handing her a split log. Outside, the wind shifted. In that moment, Hawk heard it faint, far off, but enough to chill the blood. The unmistakable sound of a distant horse's whinny carried on the frozen air. Someone else was coming, and they were already close. The sound carried again longer this time. A horse's whinny, sharper than before, followed by the faint jingle of tack. Hawk's jaw tightened. Whoever was out there was not wandering. They were tracking. The woman's head jerked toward the door. She shifted the bundle in her arms, her fingers instinctively tightening around the baby as if she expected someone to come crashing through at any moment. Hawk caught the flicker of fear in her eyes, quickly buried, but it was there. "Brought trouble to my door," he said, not accusing so much as stating the truth. She met his gaze without flinching. "Trouble was already behind me before I found your cabin. If I hadn't stopped, my child would be dead by morning." Hawk moved to the narrow window beside the door. The glass was clouded with frost, but he scraped a sleeve across it until a patch cleared. Through the shifting curtain of snow, he could see the canyon floor stretching out, pale under the dying light. There, just beyond the stand of frozen cottonwoods, two dark shapes moved slowly forward. Riders. They weren't. Hurrying. That meant they knew exactly where she'd gone. "How many?" Hawk asked. "2," she said. "But they carry more bullets than I've seen in my life." Hawk turned away from the window. "You'll bed down by the fire. Don't move the child unless you have to, and don't touch the door." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "What are you going to do?" He didn't answer. Words were wasted on what came next. Hawk stepped into the back room of the cabin. The air was colder here, the only light coming from a single lantern hanging over a workbench scattered with tools, arrow shafts, and pieces of oiled leather. He reached for the longbow resting on the wall. The bow was old but well kept, its limbs stained dark from years of use. Beside it hung a quiver of arrows, their obsidian tips black as night. He slung both over his shoulder, then took his tomahawk from his belt and tested its edge with a thumb, razor sharp. Just the way it needed to be. When he stepped outside, the wind bit into his bare chest, but Hawk didn't notice. He moved down the porch steps, boots sinking into the crusted snow. The canyon's breath moved around him, cold, restless, and ancient. The riders were closer now. Hawk could see the shapes of their coats, the steam from their horses' nostrils. They didn't call out, didn't wave, just kept coming, slow and steady, like hunters closing in on a wounded animal. He stepped away from the cabin far enough that the firelight inside wouldn't silhouette him, then crouched low, pressing one palm into the snow. The earth told him what the woman hadn't. There had been a third rider once. Lighter, smaller, likely the child before she took him into her arms. Those tracks veered away into the brush and ended abruptly. Hawk didn't need to guess what had happened. Inside, the woman knelt by the fire, feeding it another log. She kept glancing toward the door, each creak of the wind making her shoulders tense. The baby whimpered, and she hushed him with a sound so soft Hawk could barely hear it when he stepped back inside. "They're close," he said flatly. Her eyes narrowed. "They won't leave until they have me." "Why?" She hesitated. Then looked toward the baby. "Because of him. He's not mine." Hawk didn't press further. There would be time for answers if they survived the night. He moved to the table, laid out the bow, and set 3 arrows beside it. His hands worked with practiced ease, movements honed over decades of solitude and survival. If they reach the porch, stay low. Do not open that door for any reason. The woman's voice was quiet. "And if you don't come back?" Hawk met her eyes, his own steady as the canyon stone. "Then you'll know they're inside." Outside. The sound of hoofbeats grew clearer, the crunch of snow under iron shoes. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Hawk lifted the bow, slid an arrow into place, and stepped once more into the cold. This time, he meant to greet them before they ever saw the door. The wind shifted, carrying the faint creak of saddle leather and the muffled snort of horses. Hawk's breath came slow and steady, his bare chest rising and falling in the cold, each exhale curling into the night air like smoke. He crouched low beside a jut of frozen sandstone, eyes fixed on the 2 riders making their slow approach. The canyon was his ally, its twists and shadows as familiar to him as the lines on his own hands. These men were out of place here, strangers on his ground, and that gave him the edge. The riders didn't talk. That alone told Hawk enough. Men who came with honest business would have called out by now, asking for trade, directions, or shelter. These two were hunting, and their silence was the sound of men who didn't want their prey to hear them coming. Hawk's fingers brushed the fletching of the arrow he'd already notched. Obsidian tip, silent in flight, lethal on impact. He drew the bowstring back, muscles tensing, the string pressing against the side of his jaw. His gaze fixed on the lead rider's chest. A horse's hoof crunched into a pocket of ice. The sound rang sharp in the quiet. Hawk loosed the arrow. The black shaft vanished into the dark, followed by a hollow thud and a muffled grunt. The lead rider pitched sideways in his saddle, clutching at his shoulder. His horse shied, pawing the snow. The second rider yanked his reins, scanning the shadows. Hawk was already moving. He dropped low, darting from rock to rock, circling to keep the wind in his favor. The wounded man slid from his horse, stumbling, his boots dragging furrows through the snow. The other dismounted, rifle in hand, his breath puffing in angry bursts. "You show yourself." The man barked into the canyon. His voice was rough, accented, more southern than western. "Ain't your fight, stranger." Hawk's reply was silence. The second arrow flew before the man could sight down his rifle. It struck the snow inches from his boot, but it was enough to make him flinch and lose focus. Hawk didn't need to kill them yet. He needed to rattle them, make them second-guess every step toward his cabin. The wounded rider cursed, clutching his arm. "Forget it. She can't have gone far. She's inside," the other growled. "I saw smoke." Hawk's jaw set. That meant they weren't guessing. They knew. He stepped from the shadows. The moonlight revealed him fully, shirtless despite the cold. Long black hair whipping in the wind, the glint of bone and turquoise at his throat and wrists. His bow was drawn again, the arrow's black point trained squarely on the man with the rifle. "You've come far enough," Hawk said, his voice calm but carrying across the canyon. The man with the rifle froze, eyes narrowing. "You the owner of that cabin?" "Yes." "Then you're keeping what's ours." Hawk didn't move. "The woman?" "The child," the man corrected, his lips curling in a grim smile. "She stole him from his rightful father. And we aim to take him back." Hawk didn't lower his bow. "He's not yours." The man took a slow step forward. "You don't even know the story." "I know enough," Hawk said. For a long moment they stood locked in the frozen stillness, the only sound the restless shifting of the horses. Then the rifleman's eyes flicked to his wounded companion, who was pale and unsteady on his feet. "This ain't over," the rifleman said finally, his tone more warning than surrender. He stepped back, keeping his gaze on Hawk. They mounted without turning their backs, retreating slowly into the darkness. Hawk didn't relax his bow until the sound of hoofbeats had faded into the wind. Only then did he lower the weapon and turn back toward the cabin. He knew they'd be back. Men like that didn't ride miles into the wild for nothing. Inside, the woman rose quickly when he entered, her eyes searching his face. "They're gone?" "For now," Hawk said. He hung the bow by the door. "They'll return, and next time they won't come quiet." The fire popped behind them, but it didn't chase away the cold that had settled in Hawk's bones. This wasn't just her fight anymore. Now it was his too. The wind changed just after midnight. Hawk felt it before he heard anything, an unnatural stillness settling over the canyon, the kind that meant something was moving against the night. He sat by the dying fire, sharpening the edge of his tomahawk. With slow, deliberate strokes, every sense tuned to the silence, the woman lay on the floor by the hearth, the baby bundled close to her chest. Her eyes were closed, but Hawk could tell she wasn't sleeping. No one slept easy when danger still lingered beyond the walls. He rose without a word, crossing to the door. The air that seeped in through the frame was colder now, heavy with a faint scent of horse sweat and wood smoke. Somewhere out there the riders had made camp, or maybe they were still moving. Either way, they hadn't gone far. Hawk stepped to the narrow window and peered through the frost. The moonlight painted the canyon floor in silver and shadow. At first, he saw nothing but the lean silhouettes of cottonwoods swaying in the wind. Then a darker shape slid between them. A rider. Then another. They were back. Hawk moved quickly to the corner of the cabin where he kept his traps. Steel-jawed. Bare traps, snares, and a length of rawhide rope coiled like a sleeping snake. He worked fast, his hands steady, setting a trap in the snow just beyond the porch steps. The steel teeth gleamed faintly in the moonlight before he buried them beneath a light dusting of powder. Next, he strung the rawhide rope between two posts near the cabin's edge, low enough to catch a charging man at the knees. He worked without noise, each movement as precise as a hunter laying for prey. When the last trap was set, Hawk climbed onto the low roof of the cabin. From here, he had a clear view of the canyon approach. The cold bit into his bare skin, but he didn't feel it. His focus narrowed to the two riders now dismounting a short distance away, their horses tied off in the shadows. One man carried a rifle. The other, the wounded one, now had his arm bound in a crude sling, but his other hand gripped a pistol. They moved slow and low, keeping to the shadows. Inside, the woman stirred as the baby whimpered. "They're here, aren't they?" She whispered. "Yes," Hawk said from above. His voice was calm, steady, but edged with iron. She didn't ask what she should do. She already knew. Stay low. Stay silent. The first man reached the porch. Hawk waited until the crunch of his boots was directly above the buried trap before. Shifting his weight, the steel jaws snapped shut with a metallic crack, and the man's scream split the still night. He fell hard, clutching at his leg as blood seeped through the snow. The second man darted forward, raising his rifle toward the sound, just in time to catch Hawk's tomahawk spinning through the air. The haft struck his forearm, knocking the rifle from his grip. Hawk dropped from the roof, landing in the snow with the silent weight of a predator. The second man swung a fist, but Hawk sidestepped, grabbing the man's coat and driving him into the side of the cabin. The impact knocked the breath from him, and Hawk's knee found his stomach a heartbeat later. The wounded man in the trap was still struggling, cursing in a voice that carried too far. Hawk knew the sound might draw others if they were near. He stepped toward him, bow in hand now, the arrow's obsidian tip glinting in the moonlight. "You ride out now," Hawk said, voice low but carrying the weight of command. "Or the snow keeps you." The man in the trap looked up, eyes wide, and whatever he saw in Hawk's face convinced him. He didn't speak again. Hawk released the trap, letting him limp toward his horse, dragging his companion with him. Didn't look back when Hawk stepped inside. The fire's glow felt warmer than before. The woman's eyes followed him, searching for signs of blood that weren't there. "They won't stop," she said quietly. "No," Hawk agreed, hanging the tomahawk back on its hook. "But next time, they'll bring more." The baby stirred in her arms, and Hawk looked toward the door, his mind already running ahead to the next fight. The canyon wasn't done with them yet. The sun rose pale and thin, casting weak light over the canyon. Hawk stood at the edge of the porch, bare-chested against the cold, watching the wind scrape lines through the fresh snow. The tracks from last night's fight were still visible deep. Impressions where boots had struggled, a dark stain where blood had frozen black. The woman sat inside by the fire, cradling the child, her face set in silence. Hawk could tell she was thinking about the same thing he was. The men from last night would not accept defeat. They had retreated because they were hurt and outmatched. But men like that didn't vanish. They came back with more by mid-morning. Hawk heard it, a low, distant rumble at first too steady for the wind, too heavy for a herd of elk. Then the rhythm became clear. Hoofbeats, many. The sound rolled through the canyon like a drumbeat of war. Hawk's grip tightened on the railing. He stepped inside. "You keep that child close," he said simply. Her eyes searched his face. "How?" "Many? Enough." Hawk moved quickly, setting the cabin for defense. He tipped the table on its side and dragged it to the window, bracing it with a barrel of water. He pulled down the heavy elk hide from the wall and nailed it over the door's frame to block the cold and keep smoke from escaping, if the fight drove them to use fire as cover. From the rafters, he took down a bundle of arrows bound with rawhide, his last reserve, each obsidian point sharp enough to pierce bone. He laid them in neat rows beside the longbow dot. By the time he stepped back outside, the riders had appeared. There were 6 of them this time. 4 carried rifles. 1 held a shotgun. And in the lead rode a man Hawk had not seen before, tall, broad. His coat black as coal, and his hat pulled low over a face Hawk could only half-see. The leader reined in his horse 20 yards from the porch. "You the one that bloodied my men?" His voice carried, deep and rough. "They rode to my door," Hawk answered. "I sent them away. You've got something that don't belong to you." The man's eyes shifted past Hawk toward the faint flicker of firelight inside the cabin. "Hand it over and we'll be gone." "No." Hawk's tone didn't change. The leader's grin was thin. "Then we take it." The first shot cracked the air, splintering wood from the porch post beside Hawk. In the same instant, Hawk's arrow flew, striking the rifleman who'd fired in the shoulder and spinning him from the saddle. The others spurred forward, their horses kicking up plumes of snow. Hawk moved fast, slipping behind the corner of the cabin, loosing arrow after arrow. One horse reared, screaming, when its rider fell. Another man dismounted and tried to rush, the door only to trip on the rawhide rope Hawk had left from the night before, sprawling face first into the snow. The leader advanced slowly, firing his revolver with calm precision, forcing Hawk back toward the porch. Hawk ducked behind the table shield, an arrow grazing the brim of the leader's hat but missing flesh. Inside, the woman crouched low, the baby muffled in the folds of her coat. A stray bullet punched through the wall inches from her head, spraying splinters. She held her breath, not daring to move. Hawk knew he couldn't hold them in a straight fight. They had more guns, more men. But the canyon had narrow veins, twists of rock and ice that could trap a man if he didn't know the way. He loosed one more arrow to buy himself time, then vaulted the porch railing, vanishing into the snow-dusted sagebrush. The gunfire followed, but Hawk was already gone, moving silent as a shadow toward a narrow gully behind the cabin. From there, he could flank them. The leader barked orders, sending 2 men after him, but Hawk wanted them to follow. The canyon would swallow them whole. When Hawk reached the ridge above the cabin, he could see everything. The woman crouched inside, the leader circling his horse toward the door, and the men below searching for him. Hawk notched an arrow, steadying his breath. If he missed, they'd take the child before the sun dipped low. If he hit, the fight might just turn in his favor. He let the arrow fly. The morning sun spilled over the distant ridge, turning the sky a wash of gold and amber. Lila woke to the gentle sound of horses snorting nearby, the rhythmic clinking of tack, and the soft rustle of wind through cottonwoods. For a brief, blissful moment, she forgot where she was, forgot the fear, the uncertainty. Then she turned her head and saw him. The warrior sat cross-legged by the fire, shirtless, his bronze skin glistening faintly in the early light. His long black hair tumbled over his shoulders, catching fire in the sun, and tribal jewelry adorned his chest and arms, polished bone, turquoise, and carved wood that told the story of his people. He was sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate movements, every stroke whispering against the stone. Her heart stuttered not from fear, but from something stranger. In the days she had been with him, she had learned more from his silences than she had ever learned from the endless chatter of men back home. Without looking up, he said in his deep, even tone, "You did not sleep well." Lila hesitated. "No. I kept dreaming." He lifted his gaze then, eyes dark and still, like the depths of a river before a storm. Dreams speak when the spirit wishes to be heard. He paused, setting down the blade. "What did you see?" She swallowed. "A hawk circling above me, and then the ground giving way beneath my feet." The warrior's brow furrowed ever so slightly. The hawk is a sign of vision. The earth giving way is a warning. He stood, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the camp. "We ride soon. The land ahead is not safe." They packed quickly, he with precise efficiency, she with clumsy hands that made him occasionally step in to help. When she mounted the horse, he walked alongside at first, guiding it through the narrow trail that wound between ancient rock formations. Around midday the wind shifted. It carried a smell smoke. Not the soft, sweet smoke of the campfire, but the acrid scent of something burning in anger. The warrior stiffened, nostrils flaring. "We are not alone," he said quietly. Her pulse quickened. "Who?" He didn't answer immediately, scanning the horizon. His hand rested on the bow slung across his back. "Riders," he finally said. "Many, too many." They turned off the trail, weaving through the dense undergrowth. The warrior moved like a shadow, every footstep calculated, every sound avoided. Lila tried to follow his example, but twigs snapped under her boots, and he glanced at her once with a look that said without words, "You must be quieter if you want to live." They made it to a small cliff overlooking a dried creek bed. Below, a group of armed men rode in, scanning the ground. Lila recognized them instantly, the same men who had been searching for her before. Her uncles hired trackers. Her throat tightened. The warrior crouched beside her, speaking in a whisper, barely louder than the wind. "They hunt you still. You have something they want." She shook her head, but in her mind she thought of the small pouch hidden in her satchel, the one her mother had pressed into her hands before she died. She had never told anyone about it. The warrior's eyes lingered on her face as if reading her thoughts. He did not press her to speak, but his jaw tightened. "We must reach my people before the sun falls. Alone we are prey. Together." He looked out toward the horizon, where the plains stretched endlessly. "Together we are the storm." With that, he signaled for her to follow, and they slipped away from the cliff, moving deeper into the wild land that seemed to grow wilder. With each step, Lila realized something then. She had no idea what awaited her among his people, but for the first time the thought didn't scare her, because as long as the warrior was beside her, she felt unbreakable. The next morning, the land was painted in gold. Sunlight spilled over the mountains, warming the earth and chasing away the shadows of the night before. The air carried a quiet stillness, as if the world was holding its breath, watching what would happen next. Ayana stepped out of the lodge, her hair braided neatly by the elder women before dawn. She wore a deerskin dress stitched with turquoise beads that shimmered like drops of morning dew. She could still feel the weight of the past days in her chest, the fear, the uncertainty, but it was softened now by the warmth of the tribe's acceptance. By the fire, the warrior waited. His tall frame stood like a sentinel, muscles carved in the light, long black hair loose over his shoulders, catching the sun. His tribal jewelry, eagle feathers, carved bone, turquoise, told the story of his people without a single word. When his dark eyes found hers, she felt that strange pull again, the one that had been there since the moment he caught her falling from the saddle. "You walk like someone who belongs here," he said, his voice deep but softer than she'd ever heard it. She gave a small smile. "I'm still learning where my steps should go." He stepped closer, his shadow mingling with hers. "Wherever your steps lead, I will walk beside them." Those words caught her off guard. She looked away, trying to steady her breath, but he gently lifted her chin with the back of his fingers. "Ayana," he said, speaking her name like it was a sacred prayer. "You came to us as one lost. You stay with us as one found." Behind them, children laughed as they played with sticks and stones, warriors sharpened their arrows, and women pounded herbs for medicine. Life moved on, as it always did, but around the two of them, time felt suspended. The elder approached, with slow steps, leaning on his staff. His weathered face broke into a smile. "Today," he said, "we give thanks to the spirits. The girl who was taken by wind and shadow now stands in the light of her people." He looked at the warrior, then back at Ayana. "And the warrior who once walked alone now has a reason to stand taller." That evening, the tribe gathered for a feast. The smell of roasted venison and sweet corn filled the air, mingling with the smoky scent of the campfire. Drums beat in the distance, their rhythm steady like a heartbeat. The sky turned to molten gold, then deep crimson as the sun dipped behind the mountains. When the first star appeared, the warrior took her hand and led her to the center of the gathering. "In our way," he told her quietly, "a promise is not made with words alone. It is made with the joining of two paths." He knelt before her, not as a man kneels in submission, but as one offering honor. He placed a necklace around her neck, a string of turquoise beads with a single carved eagle feather at the center. "This," he said, "is my promise. That your spirit will never be alone. That your steps will never go unguarded. That your heart will always have a place to rest." The drums quickened. The people cheered. Ayana felt tears gather in her eyes, but they were not tears of fear anymore. They were the kind that washed away everything old, leaving only the new. She touched the necklace, feeling the smoothness of the beads and the softness of the feather. Then she looked into his eyes and spoke the only words she could. "Find, and I promise. I will walk beside you." The fire crackled. The stars above seemed to multiply. And in that moment, under the wide breadth of the sky, the girl who had once been lost in the darkness knew she had stepped into a new life, one woven not by chance, but by the threads of fate. And the warrior knew that from this night forward, he no longer carried his people's stories alone. He carried hers too.